Welcome everybody to our discussion this evening. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Good evening and welcome to our Reconciliation Week Author Talk. I'd like to introduce Claire G. Coleman, Noongar writer, poem, columnist and activist. Claire's debut novel, Terra Nullius, won the Norma K. Hemming Award and was shortlisted for the 2018 Stella Prize. It was also shortlisted for the Best Science Fiction Novel in the 2017 Aurealis Awards. Claire won the 2016 Black&Write Indigenous Writing Fellowship for the manuscript of Terra Nullius. His second novel, The Old Lie, was published in 2019. So welcome, Claire, a big welcome. Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, good. Claire, to get us started, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be a writer?
Yeah, okay, I can tell you that. In 2015, around my, that'll be my 41st birthday, I was traveling to my ancestral country in Western Australia, and I went to my ancestral country. I'd never been there before, and when I was there, I discovered a little historical society museum at that place, where they had an entire section of the museum dedicated to my family, containing artifacts and information I didn't know existed. Mm. So I got talking to the staff there, and they gave me information about an event at a couple of weeks later, where they'll be doing I suppose you could say, an opening to a memorial to the massacre that happened 15 kilometers out of town. Now, my grandfather was born in that town. His parents were born in that town. We know that if there's a massacre in that town, it involved my extended family. It had to have either as the aggressors or as the victims, because on one side of my family who grew up there were settlers, the other side were Indigenous. So I returned for that opening. I was told this of what happened, and the idea that was to become my first novel, Terra Nullius, just occurred to me on that day, and I just started writing it with no prior planning, no understanding of how to write a book. I just started writing, and a few months later, I was in Broome at Muggaballa Books, and if you ever go to Broome, go to the Muggaballa Books bookshop, because it's fantastic. But I was talking to the staff there, and they told me about a prize for unpublished Aboriginal manuscripts called the Black&Write Prize, and they told me that the entries would be opening in a few months. So I resolved to finish my manuscript for that, and I wanted to tell the story of the massacre, and I wanted to find a way to tell non-Indigenous people how historically. Well, there's this thing where non-Indigenous people always say the massacre was so long ago, and the invasion was a long time ago, and it wasn't that bad, and Aboriginal people should be grateful for what had happened. And I was angry at all that, so I thought I was trying to find a story to tell to change people's thinking. And the story of Terra Nullius came to me. I wrote it, and then I entered it in the prize. But just before I entered it, the prize disappeared off the radar and then reappeared. And Muggaballa, in the meantime, had dropped it and handed over management of the prize to Hachette Books, who are now my publisher. So obviously, if they're my publisher, obviously won. And from no experience at writing at all, and no training, and nothing to suggest that I could ever be a writer, I became a professional writer.
That's a pretty amazing story. It's a pretty amazing thing to happen. But as you were sort of growing up memories as well, or was it the first time you've heard those stories?
I heard the story of the massacre it was like a family story. I heard there was a massacre and that no one goes to that place, that town, Ravensthorpe, that the town was taboo. It was not a place Aboriginal people went. I heard stories of the massacre, but I didn't know until that point that those stories pertained to me. I knew of the massacre, but not that it was mine. It's funny because I had the family stories of family history talking about the massacre, because my dad grew up knowing about the massacre. His dad was born in that town, but it never occurred to me or to my dad to question whether or not we actually were involved in that massacre in some way. So it's kind of this strange thing that I should have known it was my history, but I didn't.
One of the other things that both of your novels have is that the power of the landscape. In both of your novels, the landscape is constantly changing and evolving, and in that landscape, characters are doing many things. They're fleeing, they're hunting, they're searching for safety. They might be fighting in a war. The reader often gets a sense of being disorientated as we read through what the characters are doing in the book. What do you see as the role of this changing landscape, the changing setting, and what does this represent for you, and what do you think it represents in your writing?
Well, to me, writing, a lot of the time, you know about characters by how they react with other characters, how they're interacting. And to that end, I treat landscape like it's a character that people can have love affairs with, they can hate it. So it's like you can imagine landscape is Bob, and people either like or hate Bob. And whether or not they like or hate Bob, the landscape, it tells you a lot about who they are. And that's the way I use landscape. And I also use landscape to unsettle the audience, make them not know where they are. I use landscape to unsettle the characters, because the way that the reaction to landscape is one of the biggest differences between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. The difference between how they see space and how they see the country is the biggest difference. So it's like there are a lot of difference between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, but if you think about it, see landscape as to love, as a member of the family, as the thing that you hold as who you are and as your ancestor and your country. And to the settlers in the early days of Australia, they saw landscape as a thing to dominate and destroy and control. This thing that gets in your way, and this enemy to overwhelm, change, control, destroy, fight, explore, but never this thing to love or embrace or see as part of who you are. So that difference was kind of how I positioned the main difference between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians.
Yeah, it's a really noticeable thing, isn't it? Because, for example, the settler people are longing for home. They're longing for home, which is, I suppose I shouldn't say what their home is, but the settlers are longing for home. They've brought foreign animals and plants to the land because for that sense of familiarity. It's that total they're trying to colonize what not only the people, but what is already there on the planet.
There's a couple of interesting little things there. One is that some people don't know this, that the 19th century there's an organization called the Naturalization Society.
I know about those, yes.
And they were all about bringing animals and plants from Europe to Australia and trying to make Australia more like Europe, and taking the stuff they liked from Australia to Europe so that they could make the entire British Empire this one landscape of all the same things in it. That's interesting. The other one that's interesting is in the War of the Worlds, which is a strong influence on Terra Nullius, there's the concept of the alien species trying to overwhelm the landscape with their importation of the red weed, which is this alien species that they put here to change the landscape completely. So there's this idea that colonization is not just about finding a new place and taking it, but it's about finding a new place and making it a poor carbon copy of where you came from.
Mm. And not seeing it for what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other aspects of the landscape, and in both in the old lie, as they move from spaceships to planets and the rest of it, is that sense of constant movement. It's a very unsettled sense, particularly so far I've felt in Terra Nullius. I believe you were travelling at the time that you were writing Terra Nullius. Is that?
I was in a caravan.
Yeah. Tell us about that and how you think that might have influenced you.
Well, it's funny thing is the planned to write a novel in a caravan. And people often ask me in the early days, what was it like to write a novel in a caravan? At the time, I don't know what it's like to not write a novel in a caravan, because that's all I'd done. It's funny because I didn't plan to write a novel in a caravan, but when I had the idea for Terra Nullius, I was in a caravan, traveling. So it's like I could run away and leave my traveling in a caravan and work on and not do that. But then I would have to leave what I was doing. I was already traveling around Australia in a caravan. So the only option was I had to come up with the idea is to continue writing my story while traveling. And it certainly affected the characters because actually it's funny. There's fundamental things that define my characters in both my first two novels. There's a lot of people traveling or on the run, and I travel a lot. And there's always, at least in both of them, there's multiple characters who are homeless. Which suits because until I was earning enough money from my writing to get out of the situation, I was legally homeless. So, and I've lived on the streets, and I've lived in traveling around in the caravan and all those things. So it's a case of many people write the idea of homelessness as an unfamiliar thing they're interested in. Whereas for me, homelessness is a very familiar landscape to write about. So it was kind of effortless to write this idea of people who have nowhere to go and don't know where they belong, because I had nowhere to go and didn't know where I belonged. So it fits my theory that most writing is autobiographical to at least some degree. Because every writer can only write themselves.
Yeah, well, luckily we're pretty complex.
There's a lot in it. And what does that say about me? Because I've written some pretty horrible characters in the last few years.
Just getting back to that idea of the homelessness, like a lot of the characters have this great longing for home, and a lot of the people in the novel Terra Nullius, they're forced to keep moving. They make a settlement and they're forced to keep, move again. Because of being hunted. In that, there's so written about what happens to them in a powerful way, but it's actually in this speculative novel. It is, I think, happening. What do you think? What freedom does writing a speculative novel give you? Like in this, you're writing about colonization, or you're writing about injustice from the past.
What I like about speculative fiction is that in most writing, one writes a story within a world. But in speculative fiction, you have the freedom to build a world around your story. So all all writers world build, even people who write so-called contemporary realist literary fiction, whatever the hell that is. I'm not sure what that is even. But everyone writes about, everyone has to build their world. But in speculative fiction, in fantasy, horror, science fiction, you have the opportunity to develop a world around a story. So the world itself, the development of your world can be part of the storytelling, or can be part of the didactic experience of what you're writing. And that is the power, in a way, of writing speculative fiction, because you're not limited to what is possible. You're only limited to what can be imagined, as long as you maintain internal consistency within the work itself. So as long as you don't break the rules of your own world, you can build your world to say anything. So you create a story around a world. They create a story, and you shape the world around it. So your world, it's like, if you think about, for example, The Handmaid's Tale. The story of The Handmaid's Tale doesn't tell you the story of Gilead. The story of The Handmaid's Tale is mostly there to tell you what Gilead is, and Gilead is the story, if that makes sense. The understanding of the place is what tells you what it is. And in my writing, in Terra Nullius and The Old Lie, the slow unfolding of the story world is what really gives you an understanding of what's going on. So, and without being able to build a world, you can't actually do that. You can't unpack a world slowly so people can learn from the world itself, unless you've created the entire world.
Lisa's just asked here, do you have any specific writers that you admire from that perspective of world building?
Sure. Well, the master world builder was Tolkien.
Oh yeah.
And he was, like, looking back at it with a bit more colonial history understanding it under my belt, he's definitely racist, as well as being a very good world builder. J.K. Rowling, I don't like her writing, but I love her world building. I think it's quite impressive. There's a lot of really great world builders out there, actually. There's people like, Margaret Atwood's world building in The Handmaid's Tale is quite impressive, especially since she didn't have to, as she said, she didn't create anything. Different things that have happened to women throughout history into a single package of Gilead. Rather than creating anything new, she just kind of cherry-pick bits from all over the place and build a world. And that's a good way to do it. World builders. Yeah, look, there's been a lot of them. There's a really great a novelist who is highly underrated writer of speculative fiction, Sherry S. Tepper, who passed away a couple of years ago, which I'm quite sad about. Her world building is powerful and didactic, and she somehow managed towards the end of her life to pull together about 10 different novels that are seeming in different worlds into one giant book about all the worlds at once, which I haven't read yet, but I will eventually. I've got it in my bookshelf with all the other books I haven't read yet.
Like all of us. Like a lot of us at any rate. One of the things I just wanted to touch on then was parts of before I move off the topic of setting in place, in both of the novels, you almost read almost like historical fiction at just various points in them. So that's like time is a place within your world building as well. Like, so it's quite multifaceted. So you move from time zones, and you really play with that to undermine our expectations of what we're reading as readers. So I guess it's more of a comment, but it's really very cleverly done, Claire. That's all I can say to that.
It's about Terra Nullius, I intentionally wrote with the intent of displacing it in time. That was the kind of intent of it. And The Old Lie is also intentionally displaced in time. And the reason for that is, I think I did it unconscious of what I'm about to say, but looking back at my work, I'm now conscious of what I was thinking at the time. My thought was, by the time you write about now is over. You think about it. if I sat down to write about this moment, by the time I finish the sentence, this moment is over. So how do we talk about now if we cannot actually even talk about now without now existing? So what somebody said is that they actually said, and I love what they said. I can't remember who said it now. I should remember who said it, but that's quite funny. They said that by using the structures of using futurism and historical fiction, I kind of bracket the present. And by doing so, I could talk about the present because you can talk about the present by talking about the future and making people look back. You can make people imagine looking back. You can talk about the past by talking about you can talk about the present by writing about the past and making people step forward. And what I do is I do both simultaneously. So I get people to think about the future, look at the future and the past, and extrapolate both of them into the present. So their thoughts bracket the present, having to actually write about the present because I don't think it's possible to do so. And like I said, I did that without being conscious of doing it. I just wrote and it happened. But that's exactly how it works out.
Yeah, it's absolutely cool.
Every novel, everything I write I'm more conscious of what I'm doing than what I wrote before. So Terra Nullius, I was completely unconscious of structure and practice. I just wrote a book. The Old Lie, I was thinking more deeply. My third novel, which is supposed to be out next year, is thinking a bit further, deeply into what I plan to do. The play I've been working on is about the most meta thing I've ever actually read, let alone written. So it's kind of a bit more of an understanding of what's going on. And obviously my writing is quite postmodern, but I wasn't aware until recently about intentionally putting postmodernism into my work.
Yeah. How are you finding working on those two major projects at the same time? Is that...
I've always worked on two major projects at the same time, except Terra Nullius I didn't, but when I started The Old Lie, the minute I sent off my final personal draft for Terra Nullius, so I was receiving edits for Terra Nullius at the same time as writing The Old Lie. As soon as I sent off my finished structural edited version of The Old Lie, I started on my third novel. And as soon as I finished my third novel structural edits, I started on a fourth novel, which hasn't gone very far, and a play. So I've always kind of juggled two projects at once. And there's a reason for that. And that comes down to, I think it was Garth Nix who told me this, which is the only way to have novels out quickly enough for anyone's liking, which is for the liking of people who want to read my books and for my own liking, is you have to always write one more editing one. Otherwise, you'll be about 4 or 5 years between novels. And that is kind of the structure of how writing works. Because when you finish a manuscript, it's about 14 to 18 months before they publish it. If you don't start the next one until after they've published, then it's at least 2.5, 3 years till the next one can possibly come out. And some people who want to have a novel out every year generally tend to finish a novel finish a novel completely in the time between when they finish a novel and when that one comes out. They've got another one ready to completely finished, all the edits done. Now, I'm not that good, so I end up having a novel every 2 years or so, essentially. But to have a novel done every year, you literally, if you finish a novel in October, you'll finish your full edits in October. You have to have the next manuscript full edits done by the next October, which means you have to finish writing the first draft while you're editing the other one. Not just have started it, but have finished it while editing. So that's just crazy. And I've met people who've written 2 or 3 novels a year, and I don't know how they do it.
No, well, your workload sounds heavy enough, that's for sure. I tell you what. Yesterday when we had a quick chat, we kind of were talking about the power of fiction and how it can be used to do things that non-fiction can't do. In your novels, you have many characters and many points of view, and you kind of let them tell their own stories. And and we as readers find ourselves making assumptions about who and what they are, and we guess wrong at times, or then it is turned around on us, and we have a transformation of understanding. What do you think is the power of being able to do something like that?
Well, the thing about fiction is you don't have to tell people facts. You can actually, I just remembered there's a quote from, I think it's Peter Jackson in one of the Lord of the Rings movie special features. He said you don't have to tell people about dwarves. What you do is you get a good actor to play a dwarf, and he tells people about dwarves. It's like that. I don't have to tell people about my world. I get characters, I put them in the world, and that very action of having people in a world tells you about the world. So if the world itself is the lesson, if the world is the story, then writing fiction, putting characters in that world tells a story. And in that way, you don't have to actually teach people. You put them in a fictional story and allow them, by unpacking the story, to teach themselves. And also, if you are sneaking a lesson or a bit of history or brainwashing into a novel,
or a bit of politics,
they're more likely to read it if they think it's just a novel. Rod Serling, who made The Twilight Zone, said once that the reason he writes fantasies, he called them fantasies, we call them science fiction now. The reason he wrote fantasies is because he could say things with fantasy that no one let him say if they thought he was serious. And that's kind of a way to think of it. If people think that you're that it's just a story, they'll let you get away with things you wouldn't otherwise. If I tried to get my politics about colonization and something, well, if I did that all the time, then they wouldn't listen. But when I put it into a book, I can subtly change the way people think. So, yeah, there's nothing more powerful than fiction in a way.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things is that the identity, we actually don't know who a lot of the people are. Like, we make judgments about who we think they might be based on the clues that you are giving us as a writer. But I think that makes us more open to the characters, because we actually don't have all the identifiers, if you like.
It can be a really good trick to drip feed the facts to the audience. Don't just get everything you know about something, you just put it in them, like give it to people straight away, because that could be overwhelming. But if you give people a fragment of the world at a time, or a fragment of the personality of a character at a time, you can slowly insert these ideas in people's heads. And the thing I do a lot, which is imply and then let people make their own stupid assumptions, which is fun. I mean, it's really to use something that's probably not much of a spoiler for The Old Lie. There's a character who I intentionally don't mention the gender of, and let people make their own assumptions, and the assumption is always wrong.
Yes, exactly.
About themselves.
All the fighters and the pilots and everything.
Yeah. You put, so if you make people make the wrong assumption, it reminds me of a novel by the brilliant author Harry Harrison. There's a character who wanted to be not noticed. So what he did was he was really obviously loud in a certain way. And the character says, because it's in his point of view, the whole story, he says, sometimes better than being not noticed is letting people notice you and make all the wrong assumptions. And I thought, well, and what I like writing is when someone all the wrong assumptions, and then you get to break their assumptions over and over and over again. And I did it in Terra Nullius. I did it more in The Old Lie. In The Old Lie, I did it over and over and over again because that's fun. It's fun for the audience to be fooled but not fooled. And it's more fun for me to write. And I can use people's assumptions to tell them not just who the characters are, but tell the reader who they are.
Yeah. And I think the the swivel point, the pivot in Terra Nullius is pretty amazing, which we won't tell people about, except we'll tell them that it's there. But you have to read it, guys, if you haven't read it. Because we're not going to tell you what it is.
They don't have to buy it. They can go to the library, because that's where we are. We're talking from a library right here. Well, I mean, none of us are in a library, but, you know.
We're in the virtual library.
Virtual library. And you can get my books from the library. You can get Audible. You probably get more audiobooks at the library. I don't know. Who knows? I don't do that sort of thing. I tend to own enough books that I don't need to buy books from the library. I've got too many books already.
You can never have too many. You can never have too many. Honestly, Claire, you can't.
I could say that now, except eventually I'm going to have to move house, and there's going to be a problem.
Well, one thing I just wanted to ask, it's a bit of a frivolous question, to be honest.
But
have you got favourite characters? You've got many characters in both of the novels, but do you have favourites?
I do have favourite characters. I shouldn't play favourites, but I do. I love Johnny Starr. Johnny Starr, awesome, and I love Romeo.
Yeah,
lots of fun. So basically, who I love are the swaggering gunslingers. I don't know why. They're fun, but they're my favourite characters, and I think it's because I actually wrote them with the intent of a bit of frivolous fun in the story. Rather than keeping everything serious, I decided to write a little bit of fun for myself. It's important for authors to be self-indulgent. Yeah,
exactly. You spend a lot of time doing it, so yeah.
And there's a saying which is, I can't remember who said this one either, but the the theory is, if you don't like your stories, no one else will.
Mm.
So you got to give yourself some frivolity, some self-indulgence, or maybe your audience won't enjoy it much either.
Exactly. Now, but both of your works involve a lot of plotting. There are a lot of intersecting timelines, a lot of intersecting character arcs. How do you keep that all in your head and keep it all straight? What are your golden rules about plotting? And did you have trouble with it at any point?
Well, I have 3 rules. I have 3 ways to handle this problem. Firstly, you might be shocked to know, I've never plotted anything in my life. I've never written down a plot outline in my entire life. I am a super pantser, but when I say that, from the moment I start a novel, I have the entire plot in my head. So I know maybe I've just got a weird head, but I've got my head holds stories, and I basically got the entire main plot structure in my head, and I just sit down and write it. So they're the 2 things. I pants it, I have it in my head. But the third bit's the most important bit. This is something that was not available to H.G. Wells or Tolkien or even Tepper during writing The Handmaid's Tale. I write a novel, and I read it again, and if the plot doesn't work, I cut and paste it.
Yes.
You fix it in the edit, and that is my most important trick to tell people when people want to be a writer. I tell people, don't be scared if your story is stupid and doesn't work, because computers make editing your stories so unbelievably easy now. And I am a fast writer and a relentless editor. I edit and edit and edit and edit and edit. The only thing that stops, there's 2 things that can stop me editing. One of them is my publisher says we need that finished now. That's number 1. Or number 2, I lose my temper and cannot possibly look at it anymore. Until either of those things happens, I will keep editing. And that's why I can pants an entire, The Old Lie is currently 115,000 words or something like that, but it was 120,000 words at one stage, or 130,000 words. I can keep that entire story in my head, because it doesn't matter if the order doesn't. And actually, the structure of The Old Lie was very, very different when the first edits began. You know how you say it jumps around a lot?
Yeah.
It jumped around about 10 times as much
At warp speed.
But the editors decided, the editing team said that I really need to calm it down a bit, so I did.
That's pretty amazing. Like, I find that pretty amazing. Do you spend, if you're a pantser, does that mean your characters are pantsered too, or do you spend time researching your characters?
I do a little bit of research. I'm not. It's really hard for me to determine with any certainty when research stops being sensible and becomes procrastination. Like many authors find, I'm researching now, when what you're really doing is procrastinating by pretending to research. But no, I generally firm idea in my head who the characters are, what sort of person they are, and who they are is normally the person that is needed for the story at the time. So generally what I have is, if people ask me what I know at the start of a novel, I know the first scene, I know the ending, I know the middle, I know most of the characters, and then I will put the characters at the beginning and know where they have to be at the ending. I always say that my definition of a proper pantsing is, imagine you're driving from Melbourne to Sydney, right? You go, I'm going to leave now, I'm going to go to Sydney. You know where Melbourne is, you know where Sydney is. Let me just fall over my house. You know where Melbourne is, you know where Sydney is, but there's about 1,000 ways to get there.
Mm.
And those 1,000 ways are what makes each story different. So I know I'm leaving Melbourne, I'm not going to Sydney, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. I put the characters in the car and let them work it out for themselves. But then on the other hand, in both Terra Nullius and the Odd Lie, I've added characters later when I realized I needed a point of view to do something, and I've added them and then had to go back and write them back into the story.
Wow, that'd be a lot of work.
It can be. And I've got my own slang term for those moments when you have to go back and find something that's missing and put it in. I call it backfilling. Yeah. You know when you're building a wall, like a retaining wall, you build a wall and you throw dirt up behind it to backfill. Well, that's what I do. I build the wall and go, oh crap, there's a hole back there, and you fill the hole. And that's, I backfill my stories. I do that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the is there anything else that you would like to tell us about your writing or your stories? Like, what are some of the reactions that you've had to your books that have really touched you or surprised you?
Well, when I wrote Terra Nullius in particular, I said to myself that I will consider myself to have succeeded if at least one person says that the book changed their point of view of Australian history. And I thought, if only one person says that they see Australian history differently after reading Terra Nullius, I'll be ecstatic, and I can just feel like I've succeeded. Well, there's been hundreds. Hundreds of people have said that their stories, that Terra Nullius has changed their life or changed the way they think. And that touches me every time, that people can read Terra Nullius. And someone actually said that to me once, that their life has two distinct phases, before Terra Nullius and after Terra Nullius. And that to me was pretty, a little bit overwhelming, actually. And I've actually I seem to have picked up actual genuine fans, which I never thought would happen. I don't know how to handle that. People think that I'm really, really extroverted, but I'm extroverted, but I have low self-esteem, so it's very difficult. So, yeah, it's just, but in general, the way that the success of my essentially overwhelming. So it's a bit much sometimes. On the other hand, I've had some really lovely interactions with people who consider themselves to be my fans. Some of whom may be listening in right now. I don't know.
I'm a fan.
Yeah. I've also had people who are quite successful and experienced authors who have been around for a long time and would be considered to be kind of big names in the literary industry have actually told me that they're big fans as well, and that was almost too much to handle. Or when the other day, and it's not the first time it's happened. I went to a random shop in my neighborhood that I'd never been to before, and I what do you do? I said, I'm a writer. And they said, what do you write? And I said, I wrote a book called Terra Nullius. And they went, oh my God, that's you. I love your book. So, and that happens at random. So, yeah, it's all too much.
Yeah, I was going to say, Claire, I honestly believe that, this book should be on the curriculum for our school students. I hope there's a move afoot to get that happening, because that would be awesome.
Well, like that. There's been some schools in states without compulsory curriculum, because some states don't have prescribed books. In some of those places, it is actually on curriculum at various schools. My little sister is a English teacher, and I say little sister. I'm 46, she's 44, so she's not exactly a little sister, but she's my little sister. She put Terra Nullius in on the curriculum at her school. So, and it's in various places. It's at universities, and some schools. So, it's okay. I'd like it to be part of the compulsory Victorian curriculum. Not least because it'll mean I sell a lot of books.
Yeah, well, exactly. That will always help. And while I think they have studied some amazing other Australian writers, I think that would just be an amazing experience for them. And it's such a really well fast-paced novel. It's very readable. I think the kids would be fine with that and really enjoy it. So
I think part of the problem with the school curriculum is the Aboriginal books in the curriculum. Firstly, books in the high school curriculum are all a little bit old. Not all, but predominantly a little bit old. But the Aboriginal books are a bit kind of staid and stoic. There's not kind of anything that is of a compelling. There's nothing that's compelling stylistically for a teenage audience. Not that I write for teens, but it's a sort of thing like action and chases and fighting that kids like.
Exactly. We and with the depth as well. So it's a really great combination. Now I've got a question for you, and I just we're meeting. One of the reasons we've dragged you to this late interview after a hard day is because it's Reconciliation Week, and the theme of Reconciliation Week is all in this together, which for me really resonates, particularly from your writing. What does that mean to you? How can we all be in this together with our First People in your mind?
Well, I think the way to all be in this together, and something that's kind of being ignored by our government, almost always Reconciliation Week themes and NAIDOC themes, stuff like that, there's something that's ignored, which is racism has to stop. And I know that sounds like a really a simple thing to say, let's end racism, but racism is the structure upon which this country is built. So we can't have reconciliation as long as racism exists. And also, I'm horrified thinking about all this together. I'm horrified watching the footage and all the stuff on the news from the USA right now, where, as someone pointed out, white people with machine guns complaining because of COVID isolation were welcomed into government buildings and allowed to occupy them in protest. At the same time, Black Lives Matter protesters were shot with tear gas when they're being peaceful protesters. And that can only be racism. That's the only explanation of what that is. And Australia is that different. So I think reconciliation without an acknowledgement of the existence of racism is hollow. And as a country, we pretend that racism doesn't exist. while being extremely racist. So, yeah, that's my real message. Let's just stop the stupid racism.
Mm.
And then we can do this together.
Yeah, we are in it together, and I think as a country we won't achieve what we can achieve unless we are in it together, really. Yeah. And it's sad. We've had a question here asking, how has Terra Nullius been received overseas? Have you had much interest from overseas for the?
I've had a lot of good reviews overseas for Terra Nullius. My US publisher, Small Beer Press, are fairly small, hence the name. But I haven't had that much traction, and I haven't received awards overseas. But I've had a lot of kind of interest by people saying that they love it, and it's I think it's been received fairly well, but like I said, it's really hard to get something that's so very Australian penetrating well into the USA. And also my US publisher is kind of, they've gone part-time with the publishing to open a bookshop, which is one of the weirdest things I've ever heard, because who opens a bookshop these days? But whatever. I'm hoping that, I would have expected the odd lie to get overseas, but it hasn't, which is a bit weird.
Well, it's still kind of early days yet, isn't it? Because that was only published towards the end of last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
So, fingers crossed that you get an agent over there. Yeah. You missed that. It cut out at a unfortunate time just then, but that's okay. Well, we're interested. We're seeing into your workspace here.
Yes, this is my studio. Yep.
What books do you keep with you while you're working there?
At the moment, it's been set up so that you can see some of the things I've written around face out. But generally, my studio, it's poetry and theatre here, and visual and fine art down there you can't see, and all this, except for my books that are face out, is all Australian and Aboriginal history.
Wow. Good collection.
It's huge. I've been collecting them over the last 10 years while travelling. Every time I go into a small town, I go to the town and buy all the Australian history books. So I've got quite a few. Books about Aboriginality, even if they're written by, even if they're a bit problematic and by white people, I still buy them anyway. So there's heaps in here. There's so many books, and I haven't read all of them, I'll admit it. But I've flicked through them and I've read a lot of it. Yeah, I like having those books, and that's what's so much. And over there, which you can't see, is the stuff I've written, and I've been publishing over the last 5 years, which is a lot. And there's a lot coming out this year as well.
Which brings me to the point. I've focused on your 2 novels, but how does writing a novel compare to your, like, writing essays or poetry, and which or your screenplay, I suppose? What are the nuances between those art forms, do you think? And do you have a preference? Do you prefer fiction to essay writing, or?
I prefer fiction. I actually prefer poetry. It's really weird because poetry was my first love in literature. But it's been, of all the forms, what I've had least success at, which is really weird. And that's not unusual, because I've actually known people who want to be novelists and end up getting more success from their poetry, and I want to be a poet to get more success from my novels. So that's a thing. I find opinion really easy to write and quite quick to write. I find novels quite quick. I find short stories way more difficult than people would imagine they are, because I think what it is often I'll think of an idea for I'm trying to write a short story. I've got a couple of commissioned short stories to finish, and I go, I need an idea for a short story, and I go, here's an idea. No, That'd be a novel. Here's another idea. No, that would be a novel. And it keeps going on and on because short stories have to be short and punchy.
Yeah.
And I find them quite difficult to do. On the other hand, some of the essay work I've done, I'll give an example of how opinion can be easy. I did a few of the Saturday paper portraits, and one of them I'd been asked to do a portrait, and I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm on holiday. I'm actually down fishing on the south coast of Victoria. I cannot find anyone to interview. None of my friends available. I'm in the middle of nowhere. And they sent me another email, then another one, said no one to write a portrait for that week. I said, okay, fine. I'll do something. I'll see what I can do. And then I couldn't think of anything for like a whole week. And then we were camped in the caravans, we're traveling again, in front of a pub in a small town in South Australia. And my partner, Lily, said, go to the pub and find someone to interview. I'll cook dinner. So I did. I went to the pub, interviewed the bartender, got home, wrote the piece, sent it off that night.
Oh, cool.
And that's how it can be sometimes. And other times, I'll agonize over a short story for like a month and get about 5 words out a day. It's completely... But no, I complain about writing, but I actually quite like it.
Yeah.
There's no job I'd rather do.
Yeah, clearly. You do it lots.
I do lots.
Well, we're just about to wrap up, I think. But I've talked you hard tonight. I've talked you hard.
I can talk the legs of a horse.
No, you've done really well. But someone was asking, do you have a favourite way of reading? Do you listen to audio books or e-books, or do you look at read e-books? Or
I appreciate the art form of an audiobook, but I don't listen to that many of them. If I'm listening, I'd probably rather listen to music. But I've got a Kobo ebook reader, which I love. I love it to bits. And when I was traveling around Australia, it was perfect because you just carry your books and that you don't have to worry about the annoyance of having tons of physical books. But I actually prefer the physicality of a real book on paper. The paper is a great thing, and but I like ebooks, and some things I'll buy. I'll mostly get in ebooks, like intentionally crappy science fiction. When I want science fiction just for a bit of mental floss, I'll get an ebook.
Mental floss. That's a great image. And another couple of fans have said, what music do you like, and do you listen to music while you're writing?
I always listen to music while I'm writing, nearly always. The music is constant when I'm writing, and I tend to have a playlist for each novel I'm working on, each thing I'm working on. The work has a soundtrack in my head that I'll put on either iTunes or Spotify and listen to it on loop while I'm writing that work. What music I like a lot of music. I like old goth music. I like industrial. I like Aboriginal reggae. I really like Aboriginal reggae. I like classical. I like film soundtracks. I listen to lots of different things. I have a very broad and eclectic taste in music. I used to make ambient techno myself about 20 years ago, and so music is has always been a very important part of my life. Before, when I was homeless, I used to busk playing a mandolin, which I've got behind me over here, but I haven't played it for 10 years, so I've kind of forgotten how. But I always listen to music. I can't imagine not listening to music. I listen to music more often than I don't.
Oh, cool. Well, I think has anyone got any other questions before we let Claire go and have a dinner or cozy up by the fire? Have you considered sharing your book playlist?
I have considered it. I've actually considered putting a song title at the beginning of each chapter of a novel before, because I thought that would be fun. But I have, and if you look at my books, you can sometimes even see references to songs that I was listening to when I wrote them. In Terra Nullius has several not very well hidden Nick Cave references, for example, because I was listening to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds a lot while writing Terra Nullius. The Old Lie has several references to desert reggae, which is not very well hidden, and a short story I wrote for the Kids anthology, which is up there, if you can see it. That one actually almost has desert reggae, Aboriginal desert reggae as a character I write about so much. So it's like, yeah, music's always in my books, and I have considered writing about doing a playlist for each one.
Cool. Well, I think you've
and
given.
At least Lizzie just said that it's an Easter egg for the fans finding all the song references. It's really funny because one of my editors was editing my book and said, Did you put a Nick Cave reference in here? I said, yeah, which one? They'd spotted one. So
Does Nick Cave know yet? That's the question.
no, it doesn't.
Oh, that might be a poorly kept secret now.
It probably is a poorly kept secret because we do have mutual acquaintances. So who knows?
Oh, Patrick's interested in your ambient techno. Can we find it anywhere?
No, because I haven't done it. It hasn't been. It's been around. Kind of my making of that has been extinct for like 20 years, and I don't know. I haven't got it anywhere. No. Sadly.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our conversation. Thanks so much, Claire, for giving us so much of your time.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Wonderful to talk to you. I think everyone has really enjoyed themselves listening to you speak. So thanks again. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And we might talk again one day. Bye, Claire.
Bye.